Hello and welcome to this Q&A from the Fertility Alliance. Today we're going to be talking about surrogacy and we're joined by Sarah Jones from the surrogacy organisation Surrogacy UK. And I wondered, Sarah, if you could start by just explaining what surrogacy actually is.
Yeah, so surrogacy basically is when one person chooses to carry a baby for somebody else who can't carry themselves. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
And when do people consider it as an option? In what kind of circumstances?
Yeah, so we get a range of people that come to surrogacy um, out of need rather than choice, really. So there will be women that are unable to carry themselves due to medical conditions like MRKH, uh, cancer. Other conditions that makes it impossible for them to carry. We also have same-sex male fathers, intended fathers that come to us that obviously can't carry themselves, and so they're opting for surrogacy so that they can have a genetic child.
And is surrogacy available on the NHS in certain circumstances?
We found it's very, very rare. You are more likely to get some NHS funding if you live in Wales or Scotland, but if you live in England, then it is very rare that you'll have any part of your treatment covered by the NHS. So, probably around 95% of all surrogacy journeys are self-funded.
Could you
Mm.
maybe explain a bit about the different types of surrogacy?
Yeah, so there are two different types of surrogacy. The more common one is called host surrogacy, and that is where the surrogate carries an embryo that is created by the intended parents. So either the intended mother's egg and the intended father's sperm, or uh, embryos that are created with either donor eggs or donor sperm. And so the surrogate is not genetically linked to that child in any way, they are the host. And then the other type of surrogacy is called traditional or straight surrogacy. And it's where the surrogate has decided that she would like to donate her own egg. And that can be done either through a clinic, so she can go through IVF and donate her egg to her intended parents, who and then carries that. Or some people opt for at-home artificial insemination if the surrogate prefers not to go through a clinical process, which sometimes surrogates prefer not to do. So essentially, straight or traditional surrogacy is where the surrogate donates her own egg, and host surrogacy is where the intended parents' embryos are used.
So, if someone knows that they're going to need to use surrogacy in order to start a family,
Mm.
how do they go about finding a surrogate?
So it can be quite difficult to find a surrogate. The laws in the UK state that you cannot advertise that you need a surrogate, and a surrogate cannot advertise that she's looking for intended parents, which is really to stop sort of any sort of commercialization of surrogacy. So lots of people opt to join an organisation such as ours at Surrogacy UK, or the other organisations that are in the UK that will help surrogates and intended parents to meet. Or some people opt for what's called an independent journey, where they join various Facebook groups and try and meet that way. So it is about researching which option is best for you. We always say research is the most important part. There's a lot of information out there, some of it good, some of it not so good. So the more people you can talk to, the more organisations you can talk to, the better, to sort of see what you're more comfortable with.
And how much, I mean, obviously, there are different types of surrogacy, and presumably which route you adopt might make a difference to the
Mm.
price. But what kind of prices should people think of looking at if they're thinking of this?
So we always say to people, if you're looking at a UK journey, host surrogacy journey through a clinic, you should be budgeting around £40,000 for everything, including your clinical treatment, IVF, etc. Anywhere sort of around about 40,000 is probably a good ballpark.
And what about if people are using a surrogate overseas? Does that make a difference?
It does. So there are various overseas pathways. Some of them are more trusted. So the US and the Canadian models are more trusted. There's more structure there. And that can be very expensive. That can be 120, 150,000 pounds for a journey in one of those two countries, for example. I think there's now a Mexican pathway, which might cost about 70,000 pounds. So there are different pathways, but it's really important if you're looking at sort of overseas surrogacy to consider local law as well as UK law, because both will be applicable.
Do you sometimes find that people can get into quite complicated situations if they're not aware of the legal things that they need to have thought about?
Yeah, so in as I said before, in the UK, there are laws against advertising and that commercialization of surrogacy. So there are sort of very rarely there are false promises with a UK pathway. Whereas if you look at surrogacy agencies in other countries, they are free to make like bold claims, guaranteed babies and all of these sorts of things, which people can be taken in by. Lots of people that have to use surrogacy can be quite desperate to have a child, and that can lead to looking at these sort of options and thinking that they're viable and that they're safe, when actually they're not necessarily quite as safe as they seem to be.
And how long does it take on average from the beginning deciding that this is something
Mm.
that is for you and then to get to the point of, actually having the treatment?
Well, it's not a short or an easy journey, is what I want to say. It is not an easy choice for people to make. In the UK, you can be waiting up to 2 years for an offer of help from a surrogate, because that's how it works in the UK. The surrogate makes the offer of help. She decides who she would like to help to have a family. So it can be about 2 years waiting for an offer of help. So it is not a short process by any stretch of the imagination. Then, after you've met the right surrogate, it might take a little while to conceive as well. So I certainly know journeys that have been, 4 or 5 years plus.
And how does it work in terms of legal parenthood?
Yeah, so legal parenthood in the UK is determined by who gives birth and who they're married to. It doesn't take into account genetics or intent or anything like that. So at the moment of birth, the surrogate and her husband, wife, or civil partner are the parents of that child. Um, so there is a process that intended parents go through to change legal parenthood from the surrogate and her partner to them, and it's called a parental order. And it usually takes about 4 to 6 months for that parental order to be granted through the family courts. It is a fairly simple process. It is fairly straightforward. What they're checking is that you're eligible for a parental order. And that baby is safe and well and in the best place. So that can take about 4 to 6 months. But yes, and then legal parenthood is changed to the intended parents.
And is that more complex if you've had treatment abroad?
It can be. It can be, or if you've had a surrogate abroad, it can be more complex because the courts need to ensure that the surrogate gives her full free consent to that parental order. So the surrogate has to give her consent. And if a surrogacy journey has taken place abroad, sometimes it can be quite difficult to obtain that consent. And it certainly makes it a lot harder for the courts to sort of have access to that person, to interview them, to get their consent, to get their signatures. So it can be more complex. And we tend to find that surrogacy journeys that happen overseas that come back to then get a parental order are usually seen at high court rather than family court, which then also has additional costs and additional difficulties. Whereas if you sort of stay in the UK, the family court process is fairly straightforward.
Are there any other potential pitfalls that you at Surrogacy UK try to make people aware of before they start out on this process?
Yeah, I think we try and be realistic about expectations. We never sort of guarantee you will have a baby within X amount of time, or anything like that. And I think being realistic about the timescales and also about the effort it takes in the UK. So, in the UK, it's all about making connections, like meeting people. And certainly at Surrogacy UK, our ethos is surrogacy through friendship. So, our surrogates and intended parents build a friendship that they then have for life. So, for us, the main things that we like to let people know is have realistic expectations about time, about how much effort it takes, but also to have uh, knowledge of the long-term implications for your child of being born through surrogacy. So we promote very much openness and transparency. Our surrogates stay in contact with the families. They are a part of the family. The child born through surrogacy knows that they were born through surrogacy. They have a relationship with their surrogate. And we found that to be best practice because above everything else, the welfare of the child needs to come first. So that child needs to have that information. And they should have access to that information from day one. So we try and get people to think about long-term implications, and not necessarily just think about having a baby, but you're going to have a toddler and a teenager and all of the complexities that that brings. And surrogacy, surrogacy, there are lifelong implications for that.
Can you tell us a bit more about some of the work how you can help at Surrogacy UK, people coming into this, and also about some of the campaigning you do?
Yeah, so at Surrogacy UK, we support surrogates, known egg donors, so egg donors that want to have a relationship with the people that they help, and intended parents. So meeting a surrogate is a very, very important step, but it's a very small step. There's a huge, long journey ahead of you if you go through a surrogacy journey. So at Surrogacy UK, we support people through that entire journey, both practically and emotionally. Like our support our support team is really committed and is headed up by our sort of head of counselling and wellbeing, who's also a counsellor. So uh, it does have sort of emotional impact on everybody that goes through that journey, both surrogate and intended parents. So everybody must be supported. We also work very hard at building this thriving community. Like our community is about 2,000 people strong now, and we foster this community where everybody helps everybody. So there's lots of peer support, there's lots of cheerleading going on, and lots of expertise within that community as well, which people quite readily pass on. So we have completed families that stay within the community, and our retired surrogates are an amazing resource, like an amazing source of support and expertise for all of our members. So that's what we do for our members. Looking outside of that, we have been looking for the last 11 years to change the law. So the laws were created 40 years ago, and unfortunately are no longer fit for purpose. They're not suitable for surrogates nor intended parents, but most importantly, they don't fit the needs of the child. So we've been pushing for legal reform, which cover things like regulation. Currently, surrogacy isn't regulated in the UK, and we certainly see that as a huge risk. Like surrogacy is increasing year on year. More people are turning to surrogacy. More surrogates are coming forward as well. So surrogacy is only going to grow, and we need to have regulation and mandatory safeguarding checks in place to make sure that everybody's safe going through this journey. Things like the adoption of a surrogacy register, where people born through surrogacy can go and find details of their surrogate and their surrogate's family if that hasn't been given to them. So some of these things that we take for granted in other areas of treatment, like donation, for example, we would like to mirror that on the surrogacy side. We see it being equally as important for people to sort of have that information, have that safeguarding in place.
And what would be your key tips for anyone thinking about surrogacy at this moment?
Not to rush. I know that's really difficult, both for surrogates and for intended parents, because it can be quite exciting when you first start on this journey. But our part of our role at Surrogacy UK is getting people to slow down and to really consider what they're doing, really research really well, talk to lots of people, get lots of advice from lots of different people, because the better informed you are, the easier your journey is going to be. So take your time, do lots of research, and talk to lots of people about it for definite.